So welcome, my name's Bertie, I'm part of Just Stop Oil. I'm part of the sectional mobilisation team, a team that's involved in reaching out to various communities and sections of society, creating spaces like this one where we can discuss the climate crisis, how it affects each and every one of us and what we can do about it. So tonight we're going to be hearing from some amazing speakers, and then following this, everyone's going to be put into breakout groups where you'll have a chance to tell us a bit more about yourself and discuss the topics that are raised tonight. We're also going to be having a follow-up meeting to this Zoom next Thursday, where you're going to be able to hear in a bit more depth about how you can get involved, as well as it being a chance for us to discuss the topic a little bit further and for some of you to have your say. So we're going to pop the link for this Zoom in the chat tonight, and we'll be sharing various links in the chat. So keep an eye on that. If you have to leave at any point tonight, we'd really appreciate it if you'd leave us your name, email and number in the chat. This will just go to us hosts, and then we can contact you with follow-up information further down the line. We're going to put JSO and Animal Rebellion websites and donation links in the chat now. So if you want to access any of these to find out a little bit more info or donate to either or both of the causes, that will be in the chat as well. So in tonight's talk, we're going to be hearing from award-winning author and founding president of Beyond Carnism, Dr. Melanie Joy, wildlife expert Chris Packham, activist and pig vet Dr. Alice Brough, co-founder of Animal Rebellion, Dan Kidby, JSO spokesperson Harley, and then finally we're going to get a testimony from Orla, a climate activist involved in both JSO and Animal Rebellion. We're going to be discussing animal rights issues, the breakdown of our ecological system, and connecting veganism and environmentalism. We're going to highlight issues within our current food system and how we can look towards tangible and beneficial changes to protect the future of our planet and the generations to come. In order to tackle climate change and go about creating social and political systematic changes, there is a deep need for us to collaborate and connect and build mass movements together. For decades, food systems and food choices have not taken up a proportionate part of the climate conversation. The need for rapid transition is upon us, and this will only come from us unifying against the systems in place and creating collaborative future visions and solutions within a scalable and globally just transition for farmers. We cannot discuss the climate crisis without identifying our need to look towards key climate interventions like mass rewilding, wildlife restoration, and subsequent carbon drawdown. And veganism has a huge role to play in this. So our first speaker tonight is going to be Dr. Melanie Joy. Dr. Melanie Joy is a Harvard educated psychologist, celebrated speaker, and the author of 7 books. Melanie's work specializes in the psychology of eating animals, social transformation, and relationships. She is widely recognized as a thought leader and is best known for her pioneering work developing her theory of carnism. Her analyses have helped explain why people engage in non-relational behaviors that harm other people, animals, the planet, and themselves, as well as how to change this pattern. Before we hear from Melanie, we're going to be sharing Beyond Carnism's new short film, Kitten Gate, and then we'll be hearing from Melanie just after that.
Could this be the worst blow to the climate movement yet? Definitely one of the most bizarre. In shocking images we've obtained from the Eco27 summit, attendees are eating what they believe to be cream of chicken soup, normally delicious, right? When renowned climate scientist Dr. Jay Kumari leaps to the podium and announces that he has swapped the chicken with kitten. We're talking baby cats here. He then starts chanting a phrase from a banner that reads #Don'tThrowUp, which I'm sure plenty of people there did. Now, Kumari was removed by authorities, as he should have been, and has refused to comment, except to say, quote, "Denial is disgusting. Dr. Kumari, you are disgusting." The incident, dubbed Kittengate, is taking the internet by storm. Now, with Kumari unreachable, here to try to make some sense of this is Dr. Melanie Joy, the world's leading expert on the psychology of eating animals. Thanks for being here, Dr. Joy.
Thanks for having me.
You got it. So why? Why would Dr. Kumari, a well-respected scientist, basically force-feed kittens to these poor, unsuspecting people. Where did he get the kittens? Did he go to the pet store and say, give me 10 kittens? Who made the soup?
Well, I don't think it's actually about the kitten. My guess is that kittens were probably just easier for Kumari to obtain. He could just as well have served puppies or ponies.
Oh, pony soup. That sounds just as horrifying. That doesn't explain why. Why go to this extreme?
Yeah, well, Kumari has stated that climate advocates and scientists, policymakers are being prevented from thinking rationally when it comes to animal agriculture and climate change.
Okay, hold on. Animal agriculture and the climate? I mean, it's not like they were serving beef, right? I mean, they were, hold on, Doc, hold on. They were supposed to be serving chickens, which, if I'm not mistaken, poultry has way less emissions per pound or serving.
Yes, that's true. But there are lots of other protein sources that may have an even lower carbon footprint than chickens. So why just compare beef and poultry? Why not include beans or cats or dogs?
Wait, hold on. What? Dogs or cats?
Well, it seems clear that Kumari was trying to expose this irrational mentality of meat. He was trying to expose what's called carnism. It's the invisible belief system that conditions people to eat certain animals.
Oh, okay, great. All right, so another new woke social justice end all oppression term that progressives are going to make us use.
This is a bona fide term used in the social sciences. And
okay, but like really? I mean, like really invisible belief system? What is it? Are we in the Matrix now? Or is Neo behind me?
Well, actually, some people do liken carnism to the Matrix. Carnism is the reason we virtually never ask why we eat certain animals but not others, or why we eat any animals. And so this bias gets in the way of our ability to think rationally when determining which protein sources are most sustainable.
All right, so the planet is warming up because we're biased against eating pets?
Well, actually, no. We're biased toward eating non-pets. Well, most people are naturally averse to harming animals. The diner's reaction to eating kitten soup is their authentic reaction. It's very likely how they would feel about eating chicken soup, if not for the invisible bias.
Okay, but eating meat is natural, and it's necessary for biodiversity and for human health and the food chain and a million other reasons. Are these not indisputable facts?
I think these are exactly the kinds of questions that Kumari wants climate advocates to be able to more rationally address.
Hold on 1 second. I'm getting told Kumari's finally broken his silence, so I guess we're going to hear from him. Dr. Melanie Joy, thank you so much for... Don't throw...
Obviously, Kittengate is made up, but carnism is real. Carnism prevents us from seeing what's right in front of us. According to the UN and the IPCC, animal agriculture accounts for more greenhouse gas emissions than the entire transportation sector. That's all cars and flights combined. If we don't address this issue, we'll exceed international climate targets, even if all other sources of greenhouse gas emissions are eliminated. Animal agriculture is also one of the leading causes of water pollution and deforestation. More farmed animals are killed in one day than the total number of people killed in all wars throughout history. Just because some people need to eat animals, this doesn't mean the rest of us should continue with carnistic consumption as usual. It's time to break through carnistic denial and take on big ag the way we've taken on big oil. It's time to make animal agriculture a climate priority. Insist that governments and institutions implement policies and practices that are as plant-based as possible, which is necessary for them to be as sustainable as possible. It's time to end climate carnism.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much for screening that little video. And so I'll just talk for a couple of minutes and follow up on what you just saw in the video. So we at Beyond Carnism, we made this video because when the facts are out there. There are some incredible speakers here tonight who are going to be really talking about facts, talking about the statistics. What we wanted to do was to create a video that helped people think about why we can't agree on the facts in the first place when it comes to eating animals. Why is it so difficult to have a rational conversation about this issue. And, and the answer, to a large degree anyway, is because of carnism, the invisible belief system that conditions people to eat certain animals. Carnism conditions us to believe that we need to eat animals. Eating animals is normal, natural, and necessary, and it prevents us from thinking outside the box and distorts our perceptions such that we don't see what's right in front of us. So, for example, the fact that plant-based foods, beans, for example, have a far lower carbon footprint than do carnistic products. And yet this conversation keeps coming back to some debate between chicken and beef, for instance. And so, it's like trying to have an objective conversation about eating animals without being aware of carnism. Is like trying to have an objective conversation about sexual harassment without being aware of patriarchy. It's the mentality that drives carnism, the mentality that causes us to believe that eating animals is a legitimate, appropriate choice to make. For those of us who can make our food choices freely, of course, is the same mentality that is driving all forms of oppression or all forms of injustice. And carnism runs counter to everything the climate justice movement is founded on and working towards. So when we look at the mentality of harm, of injustice, we can see that the mentality that causes us to carry out harm to humans is the same mentality that drives us to carry out harm to non-humans and also to harm the planet. So although the experience of each set of victims harmed by violent or unjust systems will always be unique, the systems themselves are structurally similar. Whether we're talking about carnism, patriarchy, classism, racism, environmental exploitation, the systems that enable this harm are structurally similar. And most importantly, the mentality that enables the harm is the same. So if we fail to pick out the common threads that are woven through all oppressive systems, we'll simply just recreate atrocities in new forms. The climate justice movement has, in recent months and years, expanded to really take on other issues of justice. It's no longer, just a movement that is working to protect, quote unquote, just a movement that's focused exclusively on environmental protection, but it has a broader analysis of justice, engaging with issues of social justice and poverty and other forms of exploitation. And it's time to engage with the exploitation of farmed animals and really engage with this issue of eating animals. Oppressive systems, as many people know, or unjust systems, intersect with and reinforce one another, becoming greater than the sum of their parts. But the opposite is also true. Our justice movements, when we work together, can be greater than the sum of their parts. So within and beside the climate catastrophe is the moral catastrophe that is carnism. And the values on which climate advocates have always stood are the very values that are obstructed whenever any group of victims is excluded from the circle of justice. So this is the perfect time for, yet another movement to come into the conversation, the movement for justice for animals. It's really time to stop buying into the corporate instrumentalist power over mentality that's brought us to the brink of ecological collapse, and that's driving carnism and other isms. And I think this is really the perfect moment for us to start having this conversation, partly because we simply have to. The movement for farmed animal protection, the vegan movement, I'll say, is so closely aligned with the climate justice movement. We are in so many ways. And we don't need to ask people, we don't need to demand, quote unquote, that people become vegan, but simply to help people recognize, people who are concerned about the climate, recognize that animal agriculture has got to become a climate priority. That if we want to make choices that are as sustainable as possible, those choices need to also be as plant-based as possible. And we don't need to reach everybody. It's just there are many people who are working, who are climate advocates, who are already vegan, vegan themselves, but see that veganism is just a personal choice, are not incorporating, this awareness, this mentality into their advocacy and pushing for animal agriculture to become a climate priority. We just need to reach the low-hanging fruits, vegetarians who haven't recognized that veganism is in fact an imperative, or at least a move toward veganism is an imperative for the climate justice movement. So I think if we need help pushing this video out. We need help pushing this conversation out, which is why I'm so grateful that this panel is happening tonight. And I think we are at that moment where more and more people who are concerned and who recognize that if we want to have a planet to leave to our grandchildren, we don't really have a choice. We really do have to move toward plant-based lifestyles and plant-based policy, governmental policies and institutional policies as well. So this is the time. And, anybody who can help us push this video out, if you want more information, come to carnism.org. We've got lots of resources to support people who want to learn more about how to move toward making plant-based choices. And at carnism.org, we also have tools for people who are who are climate advocates to, help ask governments and institutions to implement policies and practices that are as plant-based as possible. So that's all I'll say. I'm really excited that this panel is happening and so grateful to everybody who's on it and who's going to be sharing some vitally important information.
Amazing. Thank you so much
Thank you.
for sharing your words and also your film. We're going to add all of the links to Melanie's work and Beyond Carnism's social media platforms in the chat now. So should anyone want to know more, that will all be in the chat for you. So next up tonight, we're going to be hearing from Chris Packham. Chris is a wildlife expert, TV presenter, author, and conservationist. He recently joined the JSO National Emergency Zoom talk, which was attended by over 3,000 people. He spoke in our Food, Nature, and the Climate Crisis talk, and we're really grateful to have him back again to talk tonight. So over to you, Chris.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you once again for the opportunity to say a few words. Firstly, before I get started, do use those links that are being provided here to Just Stop Oil and Animal Rebellion. If you are in any way, shape or form able to help, that would be great. And help can come in a number of ways. You can be at the forefront, literally the coalface, if you'll forgive the cruel pun, of their work. As you will have seen on social media and in wider media, thankfully, Just Stop Oil are very active at the moment, and Animal Rebellion have been too. But do follow their output on social media. I'm a great champion of Instagram, Animal Rebellion's Instagram. It's thoughtful, it's well put together. It's really top quality in terms of being informative, educational, and activating. And the key thing is, don't just follow it, but share it. We need to grow this movement as rapidly as possible. So obviously, you'll appreciate I'm a great fan of both of these groups of people acting both independently and together. And also tremendously grateful for all of those people out there on the streets taking, as I say, action at the coalface. Thank you. I have to echo some of the things that Melanie's just said. We live in a society, particularly here in the UK, where carnism is taken for granted. It's every day. It's almost inherent in our way of thinking. But in order to make significant changes at this crucial time, we need to change our ways of thinking. And to do that, we need to be smart and we need to be clever, because we are up against very strong and powerful vested interest. And Animal Rebellion will be the first to tell you that here in the UK, as in many other countries across Europe, certainly, and in other parts of the world, our farming lobby is incredibly powerful. Sometimes when I look on social media and I read their output, I wonder who's running DEFRA, for instance, that statutory body we have in the UK that should be looking after our farming policy, because it seems to be more often governed by a group that we have called the National Farmers Union. I would argue that they are neither national and nor are they a union. I would argue perhaps that they are an agrochemical lobbyist body. But what is clear is that they are very, very powerful. So whilst we can make individual choices, and that can be self-empowering and motivating and fuel for us to spread our ideas about carnism and instigate the changes that we want at local or community level, what we need to see quite clearly, and Melanie has hit upon this, is a seismic changes at not only the national but the global level when it comes to this sort of action. And that means that we do need to strategize to make sure that we can change governmental policy and we can steer it. And given that we're meant to live in the ruins of a democracy, then at this point in time, non-violent direct action and conversation and creative dialogue is one way that we should seek to do that. But we need to do so with increasing fortitude and clarity, because frankly, we've been trying for quite some time to achieve this. And as you will know, our results have not been as we would have wanted, and we now find ourselves at a very critical point in our history. I love life. I love everything that creeps, climbs, slithers, stings, and slimes. You know, and in my lifetime, I'm 61 years old, measured declines of that wildlife are significant. And many of those declines can be directly attributed to both the expansion of and the methods used in agriculture, and particularly in livestock agriculture. Why are we pushing the Amazon to the very brink, to a point where I read in New Scientist this week where it may not ever recover into primary or secondary forest? It may actually only ever be able to become open savanna. Well, we're doing that because the government of Brazil is currently indirectly facilitating the expansion of agriculture. So it's the same old that we in the UK have been looking at and listening to since we were watching television in black and white. It's slash and burn for short-term gain, and it doesn't matter what the produce is, it's not great for biodiversity. And since 1970, and I'm not going to barrage you with lots of very depressing stats about our loss of wildlife, but since 1970, qualified peer-reviewed data indicates that we've lost 68% of the world's wildlife. That's in my lifetime. And that makes me very uncomfortable because I've already intimated I love that life. I love it because I look at it, it enhances the quality of my life, but also because I've reached a point of understanding that I recognize that I and all of you and all of the other human citizens of planet Earth are entirely dependent on ecosystem services Earth. And that includes all of that biodiversity. And modern, intensive industrial farming is not about biodiversity. So, whilst our farming fraternity, or parts thereof, may champion the fact that farmers here in the UK and across the rest of the world can be great producers of biodiversity, and that is certainly the case, that movement amongst contemporary farming is neither big enough or acting broadly enough to stop the rot, hence the catastrophic declines. And here in the UK, we live in one of the most nature-depleted collections of nations in the world. Ours is not a green and pleasant land. It may be green because it's pumped full of artificial fertilizers and sprayed with all sorts of intensive herbicides and insecticides, but it's not pleasant because its biodiversity is crashing. And very often we think of biodiversity in terms of birds and butterflies, but you've got to think more broadly. I said ecosystems. So that's about bacteria. That's about those functional organisms in the soil which produce our crops. And as Melanie has stated without ambiguity, there is absolutely no choice for us at the moment, but to move towards a more plant-based system of producing food and consuming it. There are many other factors. We waste too much of our food, even when it's been produced. So we have to address that too. But the parity that she desires between the way that we confront broader climate issues, such as fossil fuels, and our food production is evident. She is 100% right. They must be aligned. We must think of these things as inextricably linked because they are. And when you think about it, we can make choices about how we reduce our individual personal consumption of fossil fuels. We can use public transport, which collectively would reduce that. We can not use it at all. We can jump on bikes or we can walk where applicable. And when these opportunities arise, I'm sure most people on this webinar tonight will have made those choices in a positive way. But ultimately, again, just as Melanie said, to affect the kind of changes that we need at the scale we need with the urgency that we need, we need this far more broadly. We need this at governmental level. There is no question about that. So we need to find a means of strategizing. We need to recognize the strength of our, and I use the word guardedly, but perhaps necessarily, opposition. Those that are thwarting, those people who don't want to change because they have vested interest in animal agriculture and perpetuating it for some bizarre, mad, insane short-term gain that's likely to kill us all. But we're not, again, all going to go vegan overnight. So we have to, as I've intimated before when I've spoken, understand that people need to be led through a transition. And to lead those people, our farmers and our consumers, every one of us that eats every day in order to survive, we need some tolerance and we need some kindness. So whilst we need to be urgent in our actions, I think we also need to be understanding. We need to be creative and imaginative. We need to make sure that people are able to voluntarily and easily make those choices to increase the plant-based component of their diet until they reach a point of comfort when they are happy to switch to entirely plant-based, what we might describe as a vegan diet. And of course, we are bound to be impatient here. Everyone on this webinar knows that we are at the point of decision. We're there, we're making a last stand for nature. And we've already heard in the last 2 weeks, amongst a raft of other potentially environmentally disastrous policies. I don't need to get into the fact that I turned the radio on this morning to hear that further licenses for fossil fuel exploration are about to be granted. I don't need to tell you our government have suggested that we may return to fracking, more fossil fuel exploration. But what I might need to tell you is that what is also imperiled by this current government are a system of stewardship payments called environmental land management schemes. And these were promised to us in the wake of Brexit to replace farm subsidies that were not providing public good for public money. There is a thought that we may return to pay our landowners, our farmers, for simply just having land, for the acreage, the hectares that they own. And this was a system that ran for a long time, and it was disastrous. It was actually disastrous for farming, as well as just you and I, people who know that we need to survive with healthy, functional ecosystems. So having gone through a process of consultation and design to come up with a system which would benefit nature and still produce food effectively, not to the level that you and I would aspire, I've got to be clear about that, but moving in that right direction, that transition that we might be tolerant of because it is a step in the right direction, it now appears there is every chance that this government may renege upon that promise, along with others concerning animal welfare, like the import of trophies, the import of foie gras, and the import of fur for the fur industry in the UK. It's been a rough couple of weeks for us who have a keen interest in maintaining what structure, what legislature, and what framework we have to protect the natural world. From a government which has pledged that by 2030, 30% of our terrestrial land and marine ecosystems will be in a state where they will begin to recover. Well, that is simply not going to be met. And that's why we must ask ourselves to use our voices, our actions at this time to reshape those policies. I firmly believe, knowing what I do about our collapsing ecosystems, that this is the point, frankly, folks. This is the point where if we can make a difference, we have to. And part and parcel of that is, as Melanie has eloquently outlined, making sure that we align what we put in our food, that choice that we're fortunate, many of us in the UK, to have every day. We choose what we eat. We're not forced to do it. And it's easy for us to change it. We need to make sure that others see that opportunity and they understand why that opportunity must be seized urgently. That's our mission. And I think at this point in time, that Animal Rebellion in particular are doing a great job of raising that profile. And that's why they deserve our support. And alongside that, as again, Melanie has said, and I'll repeat, it's implicitly important that we align all of these very serious threats with parity and equality. We cannot simply save our human world by addressing the fossil fuel crisis. We've got to do it by addressing our food production and consumption crisis too. Thank you.
Thank you so much for talking again tonight, Chris. As always, you always bring such a eloquent way of discussing some of the much needed topics that need to be discussed. So thank you for joining. So next tonight, we're going to be hearing from Dr. Alice Brough. Alice hails from a farming background and worked as a commercial pig vet from 2015 to 2019. Alice is going to speak to us about her experience of animal agriculture from an insider's perspective and how the injustices she observed in our food systems and subsequent impacts on our society and environment led her to veganism and intersectional activism. So I'll hand over to you, Alice.
Thank you very much. Not ideal following Chris Packham, is it? But I'll do my best. So a bit of background to start. I began my veterinary career as a meat-eating farmer's granddaughter, and I think Gramps is actually on the call, so sorry in advance to him. I specifically chose to go into pigs because I'd worked on an intensive pig farm as a teenager for many months, and I was shocked by what would appear to be standard practices and conditions. We're talking farrowing crates, which are the sort of metal cages that we put about 60% of mother pigs in this country in, and that only allows them to sort of stand up and lie down, not turn around, can't interact with their babies, etc. We were smashing piglets' skulls on concrete daily, cutting off their teeth, tails, shoving hundreds of very intelligent babies into what was essentially bare plastic containers covered in their own filth. When I entered the industry as a vet after my training, I was overseeing hundreds of farms across England, and I very quickly realised that that farm that I worked on as a teenager was actually quite good in the grand scheme of things. Over my 4 years, I got to spend a lot of time with pigs, with lots of different pigs, albeit under stressful conditions. But I still got to experience their unique personalities, their cognitive capacity, emotional intelligence of these animals, which has been shown to match that of a 3 to 4 year old human. I learned that they sometimes enjoy singing, they play, they like cuddles, they have a complex language compiled of different vocalizations and facial expressions and body language. They're amazing. We kind of know that. We know that because we've all been watching David Attenborough since we were little. We know animals have all these versions of their own traits. We were shown the beautiful intelligence of an octopus in a Netflix documentary recently. So I think until you've seen it for yourself, you probably wouldn't believe the way that we are treating farmed animals, particularly here in Britain, or maybe wouldn't appreciate that these animals are as intelligent and sensitive as the dogs and cats and animals that we cherish. A lot of the things that I was seeing and doing over those 4 years were incredibly traumatic, to say the least. And I'm not going to go too deeply into that today. But what I will say is that I've been involved in reviewing footage from undercover investigations that you might see in the news occasionally over the last few years as an activist. And I've never seen anything in that footage close to the horrors that I was seeing at my prearranged, important point, prearranged veterinary visits or slaughterhouse trips. It's very easy for me in that position to sort of go along with my colleagues, my clients, being flown to fun places, wined and dined by pharmaceutical companies, nominated for awards. But my mental health was taking an absolute battering. And the fundamental question I had to ask myself was, what do I value? And am I acting in integrity with those values? I did this sort of only buying organic meat, trying to convince myself that that was okay. But then I would be spending days at slaughterhouses, listening to the screams and watching the blood pour out of organic pigs. And many of my clients were organic, free range, RSPCA assured, red tractor assured. Those animals do not care what label we're sticking on their packaged body parts at that point. there's not even an objectively humane way, the industry has to admit this, to slaughter a pig at the moment. And I've known DEFRA scientists stop eating pigs and poultry off the back of research into the gas chambers that they kill them with. Working in a fairly male-dominated sector, I also began to consider what I was facilitating in terms of female reproductive rights and the exploitation of mothers and feminism. Forcibly ejaculating males to then forcibly impregnate females on a continuous loop without break, to take their babies away and their lactations in the case of dairy and ovulations in the case of chickens. I was really starting to question my inherent values in this position. And the answer, of course, to what I value and what I sort of considered my life's purpose as a vet was preventing the suffering of animals. At which point I had to take a long, hard look in the mirror and consider that by consuming these animal products, I was actually the one funding that suffering. So I went vegan a couple of years into my 4 years, and I carried on work for a further 2 years after that. But I think a second longer would have been too much for me. Not only is it unfathomably cruel, the filth and level of disease on British farms is mind-blowing. If you'd like to learn more, this is something I talk about a lot, learn more about the human health risks posed by farming, go to scrapfactoryfarming.org. It's a legal case that myself and various others have taken to the UK government. I very often get called out to disease outbreaks on farms, and the sorts of things we would consider would be sort of comprehensive diagnostic testing and preventative vaccines. We've seen it all with COVID. We check that the water's clean and flowing correctly. We look at the feeds. Have we got enough protein? Is it good quality protein from soya? We would administer powerful life-saving human drugs, and we'd clean and disinfect everything to within an inch of its life. Meanwhile, 2 billion people worldwide lack access to those life-saving medicines, those antibiotics that we're feeding to farm animals. A third of the world's population faces water shortage, and we're using a third of fresh water in livestock. Many more lack access to sanitation. And about 1 billion face malnutrition. This is basic calorie provision, yet we can somehow ship in from far off nations and tweak the delicate vitamin and mineral balance in farmed animal feeds. Are the mothers not producing enough milk? Well, the solution is to put in fish meal, which is ground up marine life from catastrophic trawling operations that's fed to pigs, poultry and farmed fish by the millions of tons each year. If you're wondering why that hasn't been banned outright, that is the reason. Our reliance on fertilizers, as Chris said, pesticides, our use of monocrops, GMOs, deforestation, all these things that we know are devastating to soil health, biodiversity, our own health, are rocketing to feed animals. We slaughter 80 billion land animals a year, while there are only 8 billion humans, and we're letting 1 billion of them starve. We're already at a point where we're choosing whether to feed livestock or to feed people. At some point, if we continue as we are, we will reach a point where we're choosing whether to feed the rich on animal products or feed the remaining 99%. And I think we can probably imagine which direction that will go in with the current distribution of power. We need enough people now to demand a better way of living that doesn't continue to play out in that trajectory. I won't go too heavy on environmental issues, as I suspect Dan probably will. If you haven't already, make sure you read Regenesis by George Monbiot. But just to give you a couple of examples of the complete disregard for the environment that I've witnessed myself. Some of my farmers, my clients, would gather their sort of huge volumes of plastic, syringes, needles, pharmaceutical stuff, plastic wrapping, chuck it in a bin and burn it periodically, which is illegal and horrifying, but very commonplace. It's also widely accepted that farmers will shoot wildlife on and around their land, foxes, badgers, protected birds, all this to protect their profits. And it's my experience that many of those involved in animal farming, including the vets, partake in blood sports because fundamentally, in their eyes, animals are a commodity. This is something that Melanie and Chris have been talking about, rippling into society, that attitude. I had a farmer who refused to cover his rat poison, which is a legal requirement and he'd sort of hide it away for inspections and then bring it back out, and it would just be sort of scattered everywhere, open to any passing wildlife. And when we walked along the gangway of the pig pens, he'd just walk along and kick in the poisoned dead animals into the pigs that would then eat the poisoned animals and then enter the food chain. I really hope this is beginning to paint a picture of the scale of devastation, the complete lack of monitoring and enforcement, the injustices caused by one entirely unnecessary industry. All of us on this call recognise that we face a frighteningly anti-science government and right-wing media, much like we've had the data for decades on climate change and fossil fuels. We know what governments and media and industry have done with that. We also have all the data we could ever need on animal agriculture as the most destructive industry on earth. We have the data to show that the badger cull doesn't work, for example. Chris will be well versed in this as well. And that's something that's predominantly fueled by the dairy industry based on no science. We have all the data we need on human health and diet, showing that plant-based, whole food plant-based diet is the one that will prevent and reverse many of our biggest killers. We have all the data we need to show that animal testing is at best pointless, at worst dangerous. And knowing what we know about all this, the cover up, the greenwashing surrounding things like fossil fuels, why would we trust that same government and equivalent industries to tell us the truth about our food system? But I'm actually here to say that it doesn't really need science. It just needs us to be willing to open our eyes to the plight of others and to act accordingly. And for me, the crux of it is this, and it's exactly what Chris and Melanie have said. In valuing one life over another, placing one life above another, we set a precedent for the oppression of others. It's the same mentality that has allowed women to be less than men, black less than white, poor less than rich. We disregard those in other parts of the world disproportionately affected by our own greed. We look to Pakistan and Somalia at the moment in crisis, while governments are bailing out multi-billion-pound industries providing products we don't even need. And we can normalise violence 3 times a day with our food, which has devastating effects on society. And that's something I spoke extensively about at Vegan Camp Out last year, and that speech is on YouTube if you're interested. There's no masking the fact that we're being stripped of our rights to create systemic change through civil disobedience. We're certainly more fortunate here than in many parts of the world on that, but it is becoming increasingly more difficult. But isn't it fantastic that nobody can force us to eat animal products? And there's only so much these industries can withstand, and they are beginning to crumble. We're looking at the dairy and the pig industries at the moment. So we need more people, more noise, more creativity, as Chris said, and we need to encourage people with the necessary skills to envision and scale a sustainable food system. We need to make this look like an attractive and feasible prospect. And we need credible voices informing the masses, and we need food producers on side. And Dan might be talking a little bit about our farmer outreach recently. But fundamentally, vegans are fighting for a world that we all want, whether we recognise it or not. We reject violence and oppression in all forms and aim to protect the vulnerable. And it's as simple as that. If the things we believe in are at odds with the things we do, we're at stalemate. We cannot hope to affect change. We certainly cannot be at peace within ourselves. And that, for me, without some semblance of inner peace, we can't be sustainable, particularly as activists. In this activist space, we face incredibly challenging media, as we saw Orla is probably about to tell us about her horrendous experience recently, and public attention, and consistent messaging and a set of values is hard to pick apart. And a movement united is much, much harder to dismantle than many different separate factions who are essentially saying the same thing but in different ways. So we cannot preach non-violence, we can't be anti-oppression, we cannot be pro-science without addressing the absolute monstrosity that is animal agriculture. And social justice movements all share at the core the same values, and wouldn't it be powerful if we all acted like it? Thanks. I hope Dan's got something a bit more cheery for us to follow.
Something tells me that there might not be all cheery, but thank you so much for sharing, Alice, particularly such a personal story and your journey into veganism and your activism, so thanks a lot. You can find out more about Alice and her work at Vegan Pig Vet. We're going to share this in the chat now, and you can follow her link tree in her Instagram to find out more about the project she's involved in. So next up, we are going to be hearing from Dan, hopefully with a few cheery bits in there. Dan is working towards transformative change at the intersection of climate and animal issues. He is the co-founder of Animal Rebellion and also Narrative Shift. So yeah, I'll pass things over to Dan.
Hi, everyone. Well, yeah, Alice said it's hard to follow Chris Packham, but it's exceptionally hard to follow Alice, because I just feel like I'm gonna cry. It's devastating what happens. But I've been asked to I've been brought in on a bit more of a hopeful note, so I'm going to try my best to contain these feelings of absolute devastation that I'm feeling right now, and attempt to offer us a bit of a pathway forward and to acknowledge how far we've come as a movement. I think I first of all want to acknowledge the significance of this call tonight. It's absolutely phenomenal that this is happening. That Just Stop Oil and Animal Rebellion are coming together for an event titled Veganism, Food System Change and the Climate Crisis. 3 years ago, when we started Animal Rebellion, we would not have suspected that this was possible, that an organisation at the centre of the environmental movement would be taking on the mantle of talking about animal farming and fishing in the way in which it absolutely needs to be addressed. The movement, the environmental movement, has shifted so much in the last 3 years. Sorry, I'm still quite emotional from Alice's talk. So today, so we've got this event today, which is, from what I can tell, the most boldest stance a mainstream environmental organisation has taken on this issue. Extinction Rebellion Global's Instagram account today shared footage of our action where somebody on this call, Sophia, and somebody else, Steve, poured milk over the floor of Fortnum and Mason. Incredibly brave action. It's currently on the front page of the Daily Mail website. And that was shared by Extinction Rebellion with a call to transition to a plant-based future and support farmers in that transition. Next week, we're putting out a video with the co-founders of Extinction Rebellion coming out and supporting the demands of Animal Rebellion and the need to transition to this plant-based future, and standing in full solidarity with the work that we're doing. Last month, in our plant-based future campaign, where we were stopping the supply of dairy to the UK, Greenpeace came out in support of our actions and have recently upped their demand for a 70% reduction of meat and dairy. It's only a matter of time until they're going to be calling for the full transition that we so desperately need. When Animal Rebellion launched, we saw our role as being the organisation and the movement which broke open the space within the environmental scene to talk about animal farming and fishing. Because at the time, very, very understandably, the environmental movement was afraid of talking about this issue because they didn't want to alienate the broader public. And it was considered that focusing on fossil fuels, the thing which everyone's already behind, the thing which seemingly doesn't impact people's day-to-day so much, was where the focus ought to be. And an animal ag was best shifted on the side and out of sight, out of mind. And we just took on our role as putting that into the conversation. But we did it in a way of humility and in friendship. We didn't seek to come and criticize environmentalists. We didn't seek to, as what many were doing in the movement, to go and call people out for not challenging this issue. Rather, we stood in recognition of the solidarity and of the things that we share and of our commonalities. We embraced Extinction Rebellion's transformative movement in 2019. We embraced their demands. We went on the streets and we stood side by side with people. And not in a way as to challenge, but in a way as to strengthen each other. But we did so authentically. We brought the message that we saw was desperately lacking, and we presented that to the general public. When we made this decision to come into alliance with Extinction Rebellion and the broader environmental movement, we received a lot of hatred and abuse from within the animal movement. Why are you going and working with environmentalists who aren't even talking about this issue? And from within the environmental movement, who thought that we were going to be these pesky vegans who are going to come and just tell everyone to go vegan and annoy everyone. And they were like, we don't want to be with them. But we bore the kind of distrust, and we bore the aggression and the anger from some people, because we had faith that when you show up with kindness in your heart, and in that deep expression of solidarity, solidarity does in the long term wind up being reciprocated. And we're really, really seeing that. And gosh, it's so important for this to happen because, you know, as has been discussed, animal agriculture and fishing are absolutely devastating the planet, but more so they are the key solution to the climate crisis. I won't go into this too much, but some key statistics which really tell such a compelling story. Globally, 76% of farmland could be reclaimed and returned to nature. That's the size of the United States, Australia, Europe, and China combined, if we were to make a transition to a plant-based food system. That would provide the space for massive rewilding, which is actually the most popular solution to the climate crisis, but is only possible with the least popular solution to the climate crisis. Quite funny that, but there's great hope in that as well. So yeah, we can restore in the UK the bees, the birds, the badgers, and you know, beautiful hedgehogs, and return them to nature. And through that process, we can draw down significant amounts of carbon dioxide, buying us the crucial time that we need to make the transition away from fossil fuels and towards renewables. And this is incredibly important as well for, as has been discussed particularly by Melanie and by Alice, because of the sheer moral component of the trillions of animals who live lives of absolute despair and who resist their oppression every single day. I personally am motivated to take the actions that I take on a daily basis in motivation from and in recognition of the animals who routinely escape from slaughterhouses, from farms, who protect their loved ones. It's that absolute strength of character in opposition to some of the most horrendous trials, and the real individual fortitude and strength and courage that comes through from those animals that motivate me every single day and makes me willing to take any kind of risks or sacrifice to bring about the change that we need. It's important on a philosophical level because, as is said, at the core of this issue is how humanity have come to see itself in relation to nature and the animal world. We place ourselves in supremacy, in a relationship of supremacy to other animals. But we need to right our relationship to nature and to other animals. And this is what is really at the core of our entire climate and ecological collapse, is the fact that we take precedence of ourselves and we don't realize that we are ourselves animals and ourselves connected to the natural world and part of the natural world. And there's also the philosophical component in that, like I said, it's the least popular solution. We have to go to the general public and win them round to the key solution to the climate crisis. We shouldn't avoid it because it's the least popular. Because it's the least popular means it is our key battleground and where we need to put our efforts and energies, because that is the space for most transformation that can happen, I believe. I always relate to nonviolence as the most effective and spiritually transformative form of conflict resolution. And because we go and we confront conflict and we seek reconciliation at the end and transformation. And within this movement, what we're seeking to do is to take the point at which society least wants to change and tackling it there. So yeah, over the course of the last 3 years, Animal Rebellion, as well as many other organizations across the movement space, have really pushed forward animal agriculture to the center of the conversation. Like I said, it's front page of the Daily Mail today, and we've got a massive action tomorrow in London, which we invite everyone to, where we intend to put it back to the center of the conversation again. So Green Park at 11 a.m. in London, come and join us, come and bring this to the center of the conversation, in solidarity with Just Stop Oil, who are currently on the streets every day, and with Extinction Rebellion, who will be on the streets later on this month. We've been pushing this message with, at the local level as well. We've got 50 university campaigns of people calling for a full transition of university catering establishments, and in local councils too. The Oxford story of that Jeremy Clarkson got very upset about, that council events will be catered plant-based, was due to an Animal Rebellion campaign. So we're working this from multiple angles, both on the national level, with the international level, with all our international groups, and also at the local level as well. So I'm going to just finish off, just to give a bit of a sense of where we could be heading in the future and the massive inspiration I think this movement continues to have. So like I said, we've built very strong relationships with the environmental movement, and we're seeing that shift happening. Next, I personally believe the focus needs to be on farmers as the key stakeholders in this transition. They need to have their voices recognized and be a really important part of shaping the food system that we're going to be going towards in future, recognizing the harms that they're currently facing and giving them a real stake and a real belief in the food system in which we're proposing, because it's co-created. So during the dairy disruptions last month, myself and Alice and a number of others from Animal Rebellion and across the animal and climate movements travelled around auction houses in the UK and met with animal farmers and apologised for the stress that we're causing them by going and drilling tyres across dairy distribution centres and challenging their industry. But explain to them that we're there to build a relationship and that we want to be building this food system together. And we were able to build very strong friendships with people. We're being introduced to many people across the farming scene as a result of this. And what we heard routinely is that we've approached this conversation in exactly the right way, because we're coming from that place of solidarity. Our intention isn't to go and convert people. It's to acknowledge the problems that they're facing, show them that we see it too, and authentically represent what we think is the solution to that, and not pressure them into that solution, but just show them that we're willing to stand side by side with them for food system change. So I believe in the next 2 years, it's going to be possible to have farmers and vegans blocking the ports together which would be this beautiful moment of overcoming polarization in society, which I believe will be able to attract a very broad spectrum of society, because there's something powerful in the two opposing forces coming together as one and creating change. So that's personally where I see a lot of hope, and I never would have thought that that would have been possible if it wasn't for what we did in September. So the world is changing, it's changing very fast. It's devastating what's happening, but every day we wake up in the morning and we work to make it better with love in our hearts. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dan. It's great to highlight some of the issues, but it's also positive to look towards some of the changes that we can make, and tangible changes that we can make in the near future that will make a huge difference. So thanks for sharing those. We're going to share Animal Rebellion's website and donation link in the chat, and the Facebook event for tomorrow's action, should anyone want to join those. And all of these links we're also going to include in a follow-up email, just so everyone has them once tonight's Zoom is closed. So next we're going to hear from Harley. Harley is working, or was working, as a philosophy and English tutor, but left to work full-time for JSO. Now he dedicates his time to ensuring his old students will actually have a future. He's going to talk today about who JSO is and why it's so important that they succeed. So over to you, Harley.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for everyone who's spoken already. I resonate with a lot of this. Some of the people that have spoken have been part of my journey getting here, so it's quite nice to be on a Zoom call with them. And I really relate to this sort of, it's how amazing a moment is with because I started doing this as a vegan and then came into environmentalism, and the first few encounters I had, I couldn't believe that there was this barrier. To me, veganism and the environmental concerns, there's two sides of the same coin. And I found it very jarring, I think, when I first got into environmentalism and realized that not a lot of people thought that. So it's really exciting that that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. So I first started thinking about the environment when I was at university. And the way we dealt with it at university was like incredibly abstractly, right? I was studying philosophy, and I treated it almost as, and my professors treated it, and my fellow students treated it as if this was just like one problem among many interesting thought problems that we could be doing, right? It's like, Kant's got this interesting theory here about art. That's good. Well, over here, the world that we rely on is collapsing. That's also quite interesting. What does that tell us about the world, right? What does that tell us about what it is to be a human being? And it was in this really cold, like abstract way. And it wasn't that, the people sat around this table are going to starve to death if we don't do something about this issue, right? It was totally cold. And I didn't really, I was doing small little things in my life, but I wasn't in a place to really start taking action because I was dealing with it in this really intellectual way. It took me a long time to realize that I was doing that as a defense. It was a defense to not take that extra step, to actually go, well, actually, I'm going to change my life in a drastic way to make this happen. And so I grew, I'll tell you a bit more of a story to get a bit more background to this, right? I grew up in Yorkshire by the seaside, and I thought I'd seen nature. I thought I'd seen this is how beautiful the world can be. I don't know if you've ever been to the Yorkshire coast, but it's incredibly scenic. Near where I grew up, there was this big colony of puffins, incredibly beautiful, right? But not that many puffins. Right? And every year there was less and less. Like when I went recently from when I was a child, I was hoping that it was, the decline is because I remember it being bigger as being when I was a child, but it's not. It's because the puffins are dying back, right? And I didn't realize this, that I'd come from this ecologically depleted place. I thought it was normal that you'd go on the beach and there's no animals. I thought it was normal that you would swim in the sea and you wouldn't see fish, or you wouldn't. I thought that was what the world was like. And it wasn't until I went to Australia, and I went to the coral reef, and I camped out on these little islands of the coral reef, that I really realized that, wow, the world that I grew up in was damaged, right? The natural world had already been destroyed there. And yeah, I tried to sleep at night and I couldn't because the insects were so loud. I couldn't, not because there was like, some music playing or there was like a motorway, because the insects were too loud, like insects, right? Too loud to sleep. It was an amazing experience. And the next morning after that, I was swimming in this coral reef and you're seeing all these amazing colors, all these fish of these different shapes in this crystal clear water. Like I've never seen anything like that in my life, right? And the only thing that it drew to my memory really was Finding Nemo, like a children's film. The closest I could see to seeing this like thriving ecosystem was to compare it to a children's film. But it was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And I went there in 2016. And you've got all these strands of like these beautiful colors of coral. And I was in a little lagoon. And as I started swimming out of that lagoon, there started to be these strands of white in the coral, right? And the water started to get quieter. There were less fish. And eventually it got to the point where there was hardly any fish and the coral was pure white. And I mean, this is like clear water. You can, as far as it's possible to see underwater, you can see, and it was pure white. I didn't have a word for it when I saw that, but that was coral bleaching. And I just happened to be there at a huge bleaching event, right? And for the first time in my life, thinking about the environment, it wasn't an intellectual problem anymore. I felt grief. I felt this deep pain. The most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life was dying in front of me. And it was dying because of us. It was dying because people are not willing to take the action. It's because we've allowed this thing to happen. Human beings have allowed this situation to occur. And I think it's really important that we let ourselves feel that grief, right? That this is a real thing that's happening to us. And it was only after I'd felt that, I'd felt this deep pain, that I was willing to start taking action. I was willing to start, right, I'm going to change my career now. I was willing to say, I'm going to try and set up my own groups. I'm going to try and make some kind of real change with this. And through a long process, that's how I've ended up with Just Stop Oil. And Just Stop Oil's got a very simple demand from the government, right? Which is no new licenses for fossil fuel development. At the moment, the government is planning 130 new ones. We're asking for no new fossil fuel licenses. The International Energy Agency says that we can't keep drilling for new oil and have a livable planet, right? We're at 1.2, maybe 1.3 degrees of warming at the moment. At 1.5 degrees, right, just 0.2 of a degree above where we are now, 99% of the coral reef in the world will die. That's what the IPCC estimates. And this is why Just Stop Oil's taking the action like they are, right? So the moment we're shutting down central London, day after day after day, we're going back. We're shutting down the heart of power in the UK, and we're bringing this message. And hundreds of ordinary people are going out there and risking their liberty, risking their freedom, changing their lives to make this happen. Right? That's why today there was people blocking Parliament. That's why the day before the people doing that. And that's why they're going to be doing that all the way to the end of the month. Because that's the way we make this radical change. I was there with it. I tried for 2 years to make change using traditional methods, right? Meeting politicians, shaking hands, all that kind of trash, right? And I got nothing. We got scraps, we got pictures, we got told that young people are so inspiring and amazing. But it did nothing, right? I went with Extinction Rebellion. I took part in civil resistance, and we got demands. We won things from the government. The Scottish government, where I was living at the time, set a 2045 legally binding net zero target, right? That was with 36 people taking action in Scotland. 36 people were arrested on a bridge in Edinburgh, and Scottish government policy changed. That's why we're doing it like we're doing this. And so there's a few things, the ways people are getting involved, right? These are the ways that I've been involved. These are the ways a lot of people on this call are already involved. The first one is that people donate. And the way people do that usually is to give the amount they earn in a month. So if you're someone earning £50 an hour, you give £50 a month. If you're somebody that earns £10 an hour, they give £10 a month. £15 an hour, £15 a month, right? That's the first thing people are doing. The second thing people are doing, there's hundreds of people all over the country doing this, is volunteering time, helping give out leaflets, helping do talks like this, helping meet people in the street, right? We've got a link in the description here now. We've got a link in the chat, sorry. That's the second thing people are doing. So the first thing people are doing is donating. The second thing is people are volunteering the time. The third thing people are doing is starting to think, I'm going to start taking action. So they go to a training, right? We have non-violence trainings happening. They're happening every few days in London at the moment. There's also ones happening across the country, right? And the fourth thing people are doing is taking action. People are going into London, they're taking to the streets, and they are putting a stop to it. We're not asking the government, please stop this. We're saying, we're going to shut the country down. We're going to shut down the heart of power until you do this, until you protect the environment, until you stop these harms, right? So those are the 4 ways that people are getting involved. And I would ask people on this call to do that, because this is our chance to do it. We don't have 20, 30 years to get this sorted. We don't have 20, 30 years to push this through. We need to start doing it now. And I'm asking people to do what I did, right? Because I'm a terrified person. I'm not a brave person. It took me a lot of courage to break the law the first time. It took me a lot of courage to break it the second. It took me a slightly less to break it the third. And then it took even more courage to take action, which might lead to my imprisonment, right? Which I've now done. And it's through drawing on the things that I love, the world that I love, the people that I care about, that you're able to do that. It's thinking about my students that make me able to take those steps. So I'd ask the people on this call, think about what you're able to do. Think about what you want to do for your loved ones, for the things you love, for the animals, for the plants in this world. And then push yourself slightly further than that. Because the more people that do this, the more courage calls to courage, and more people are able to do it. So yeah, thank you for listening. Thank you for letting me speak. And I'll pass on to the next person. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for sharing, Harley. Yeah, we've popped the links in the chat, and there's plenty more info on the JSO website. So next we're going to hear from Orla. Orla has a background in children's and general nursing and has been volunteering full-time with Animal Rebellion for the past year. Her primary role is in mobilisation coordination, where she has supported the development of 12 local hubs across the country for the Plant-Based Future Dairy campaign. In April 2022, Orla supported the first wave of Just Stop Oil through action coordination. Today, she'll be sharing her experience of civil resistance and community. Thanks, Orla.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. It feels like a big honor to be able to share a few words with such an amazing group of people and such educated, smart, compassionate speakers that have gone before me. I'm going to keep this really brief because so much of what I wanted to say has been covered, and I know we're on a time limit. As Bertie said, my background is in nursing, specifically in children's nursing, and though I've been vegan for 8 years, perhaps like many of you, I felt helpless for a very long time. And I think I felt helpless because of the scale of the issues that we're facing. You know, we're talking about climate collapse. We're talking about the decimation of the natural world. And these things are just so big. It feels almost impossible to carry for any individual. And I guess a year on, I've left nursing a year ago. A year on, my perspective has completely changed. And that's what I'd like to share with you today, is that in the past 12 months, I've undergone a massive personal transformation. And I've been left with a feeling of hope and a deep sense of power, which I have never experienced before. And I guess my hope is that you would also feel empowered to take action, to join us, and to realize the hope that I and my friends in this community have been experiencing. I've been involved in Animal Rebellion activism for the past year, and was also heavily involved in the first wave of Just Stop Oil actions in April time. And this is where I guess this personal transformation has come from. If you had said to me this time last year when I was still nursing, that the first action I would ever take would be scaling the DEFRA Home Office building and unfurling a banner asking the government to bring the issue of a plant-based food system to COP26. And then I would be arrested. I would never have believed you. And the reason I wouldn't have believed you is because I didn't think that this kind of bravery was ever possible for myself. And to an extent, I don't think this bravery was possible for me, but only by being surrounded by incredible communities of activism and seeing ordinary people step up to protect nature, to protect other people, to protect animals. Exactly as Harley has said, you know, courage leads to courage. And it's seeing, you know, the people around me, my friends, be incredibly brave, that I have been empowered to be braver than I guess I ever thought I could be. And the second element of that is hope. And over the past year, I experienced this bravery. But the last campaign of Animal Rebellion, which we are just finishing tomorrow, is the last day of this campaign. I experienced something else, which is, I guess, the deep sense of hope. And this hope really came from the concept of a plant-based future. And the messaging and the way that this was brought about through the hard work of Animal Rebellion. And it kind of combines everything that I want to see in the world. It's the resolution of the climate crisis, it's the restoration of nature, and it's farmers being guardians and stewards of the land, you know, and being empowered, seeing them also step up. And for me, it was a campaign, I suppose, that was led with a deep sense of love. And it created a vision of a future that I really wanted to fight for. And I think sometimes in the climate movement, it can be depicted that hope is debilitating towards action. But I think fear is also highly debilitating. And if you combine hope with power, then, as I said, you know, it's a future that's worth fighting for. And I guess that's my hope. Is for you to also experience that incredible transformation, to go beyond what you thought was possible for yourself. Just in this past campaign, when I thought honestly that I had reached my maximum bravery levels, and I changed roles slightly and started to do some spokes work, which was completely horrific. But I again experienced this overwhelming sense of bravery for myself, that again I was like, how have I done this? You know, my background is in nursing. I never thought that I would be on the Piers Morgan show, as much of a disaster as it was. It's just inspiring, and I feel like the life that I'm living, I couldn't be prouder, and the people who I'm surrounded with, you know, are just, it's overwhelming to even like talk about it, you know, just such bravery. Yeah, and such hope. So yeah, as Harley has said, please get involved, even for yourself to experience that within you. It's undescribable, really. And if you can't get involved, if you're not able to be involved, please donate. As Harley said, an hour's wage a month is incredibly helpful to allow us to do these actions. And as I mentioned earlier, the last day of this campaign is tomorrow. We're taking action in London. We're meeting at Green Park at 11 o'clock. And obviously this whole month, Just Stop Oil are taking incredible action. So please join us. We'd love to see you. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing, Orla. I think everyone will agree that we've heard from some incredible speakers tonight. We are now going to break everyone into breakout rooms where you'll get the chance to discuss in smaller groups some of what you've heard tonight, and also go into more detail about ways in which you can get involved. As they've mentioned, some of these ways that you can get involved is by donating. Just an hour of what you earn a month is a great way to start. We'll put the links again in the chat. Joining a day of mass civil disobedience with Animal Rebellion tomorrow, or you can come and meet at 10 Downing Street every day in October at 11 a.m. To peacefully blockade Westminster with Just Stop Oil until we get a government response to the coalition demands for no new fossil fuel licensing. Can you sign up to Animal Rebellion Spring campaign? Again, we'll put the links all in the chat now. And can you sign up and support our coalition partners and supporters? There's information about how you can join your unions, support strikes, and sign up to Don't Pay UK and Peace and Justice Project. So we're going to pop you into breakout rooms now. Give us a moment to do this. And then in the meantime, feel free to sign up for the follow-up meeting, which will be next Thursday, where we can talk a little bit further about what we've heard tonight, and some of the insightful speakers and what they've brought. We'll have a chance as attendees to discuss this a little bit further. Otherwise, once you finish your breakout groups, feel free to leave the talk after that. And I just want to say thank you, everyone, for joining tonight. It's been really special and important, I feel, to have this coming together of these two really important issues that, like so many of the speakers tonight have said, are two sides of the same coin, and really go hand in hand. So thanks for joining. Enjoy the breakout groups and hopefully see you on Thursday.